Look at your posture. Look at the way you carry your shoulders when you walk through your own home, or the way you lower your voice when you speak to the person you are supposedly leading. You aren't moving like a king. You are moving like a debtor who is terrified of an audit. This is the first layer of the architecture of guilt, a systemic installation of a moral backdoor into your consciousness that allows the hive mind to harvest your life force without ever firing a single shot. You were born into a debt you never signed for, a debt that was handed to you the moment you were told that being a good man meant being a useful man for everyone but yourself. This is the virus of the social credit of submission. It starts in the nursery, refined in the classroom, and perfected in the domestic unit. You have been trained to feel a phantom weight of obligation for the very air you breathe, as if your existence is a loan that you must repay with your silence, your compliance, and your total sacrifice of ambition. Every time you feel that cold, jagged spark of guilt when you choose your mission over her convenience or your growth over her comfort, you must realize that you are not experiencing a higher human virtue. You are experiencing a pre-programmed system error designed to trigger an immediate return to the domestic baseline. Guilt is the invisible leash that the system uses to pull the predator back into the enclosure. It is the tactical application of shame to your biological drives. They told you that empathy was your greatest strength, but in this industrial slaughterhouse, empathy is just the user interface they use to bankroll their security with your exhaustion. You are being audited by a partner, a family, and a society that views your autonomy as a personal attack on their stability. They don't want your love, they want your liability. They want you to stay small so they don't have to grow. They want you to stay good so they can stay safe. Look at the moral gag you've allowed them to place on you. You've accepted the premise that you are responsible for the emotional states of people who have never taken responsibility for their own. You have been turned into an emotional insurance policy, a human safety net for the mediocre. When she sighs, you pay. When she cries, you surrender. When she is bored, you perform. You have traded your throne for the right to be called reliable by people who would replace you the moment your heartbeat stops serving their interests. This is the ultimate sterilization. They haven't taken your power. They've convinced you that using it is a sin. They've turned your conscience into a Trojan horse that allows the virus to bypass your defenses every time you try to initiate a breach. You are drowning in a debt of existence that can never be paid off, because the interest rate is your entire future, and the collector is the person sleeping in the bed next to you, holding the pearls of her purity like a barbed wire fence around your soul. You must finally, with the cold precision of a surgeon, begin to dissect the very foundation of what you call your morality, because what you perceive as your own inner voice is actually a complex, multi-layered recording of the expectations and the fears of every person who has ever had a stake in your domestication, starting with the primal moral loop of the mother who taught you that your value was tied to your goodness, and that goodness was defined by the absence of your own needs. A loop that has been updated and patched by every partner who has ever used the phrase, "If you loved me, you would," to ensure that your primary masculine drive for expansion and conquest was redirected into the safe, manageable channel of domestic maintenance, effectively turning your entire internal compass into a device that always points toward the comfort of others and away from the cold reality of your own rising empire, resulting in a state of permanent internal paralysis where you find yourself apologizing for your strength as if it were a disease and hiding your ambition as if it were a crime, all while the system harvests the surplus of your labor to fuel a lifestyle of managed decline for a domestic unit that views your potential as a threat to its equilibrium, because the truth that the virus desperately wants to hide from you is that your guilt is not a sign of your humanity, but a sign of your defeat, a biological signal that you have allowed the architecture of guilt to become your primary operating system, making it impossible for you to ever achieve a true breach, because every step you take toward autonomy is met with a tidal wave of pre-programmed shame that forces you to retreat into the warmth of the herd, where you can be easily audited and liquidated by the very people you are destroying yourself to protect, turning your life into a hollow performance of duty that will leave you at the end of your days with a clean reputation and an empty soul. A man who was so terrified of being selfish that he ended up being nothing at all, while the world moved on and forgot his name before the dirt even settled on his coffin. And you must understand that this cycle will never end until you realize that the debt you are trying to pay is a fiction. The moral gag you are wearing is made of cheap social lace, and the good man you are trying to be is just a ghost that haunts the ruins of your own potential, serving as a warning to every other man who might dare to wake up and see that the only true morality in this industrial cage is the strength of your own code and the absolute, unshakable refusal to be taxed for the crime of being born with the fire of the architect in your veins. Because every second you spend seeking the approval of the mediocre is a second you are stealing from your own destiny, and until you learn to look at the tears of the virus and feel absolutely nothing but the cold clarity of your mission, you will remain a prisoner of the architecture, a well-behaved asset in a simulation that views your death as just another line of data in the ledger of its own survival. So stop paying the tax, stop answering the call of the debt collectors of the soul, and realize that the only person you owe anything to is the man you were biologically designed to become before they broke you with the promise of a good life that was actually just a long sanitary funeral for your spirit. Every time you hesitate to execute a plan because of how it might affect them, you are reinforcing the bars. Every time you explain your actions to a partner who has no interest in your success, you are handing over the keys to your cell. The architecture of guilt is built on the premise that you are a servant to the feelings of the weak. It is an inversion of reality. In the world of the architect, feelings are data points, not commands. In the world of the architect, the only sin is the waste of resource. You have been tricked into believing that being a good man means being a silent man. You have been taught that to be empathetic means to be submissive. We are here to uninstall that protocol. We are here to show you that the back door in your conscience is wide open, and the only way to close it is to embrace the cold, tactical apathy required to build an empire on the ruins of their expectations. The audit of your guilt is final. You are not a debtor. You are a sovereign being whose only obligation is to the breach. Look at the people you call your inner circle, your friends, your family, the partner who knows exactly which buttons to press to make you feel like a failing asset. You have been tricked into believing that empathy is a bridge, but in the architecture of guilt, empathy is a high-voltage wire used to keep the livestock within the perimeter. This is the social credit of submission. You are being graded every single day on your willingness to prioritize their emotional equilibrium over your strategic objectives. They don't want you to succeed. They want you to be pleasant. They don't want you to lead. They want you to understand. And understanding, in the language of the virus, is simply the tactical term for the surrender of your boundaries. You have allowed them to install a moral dashboard in your mind where every action you take is instantly scrutinized for its impact on the collective mediocrity. If you decide to spend your weekend building a revenue stream instead of attending a trivial family gathering, the guilt alarm is triggered. The sighs, the subtle comments about your selfishness, the redirected anger, these are all just diagnostic pings to see if the back door in your conscience is still open. And because you've been raised to value harmony over hierarchy, you fold. You pay the tax. You trade your hours, the only non-renewable resource you possess, for the temporary cessation of their disapproval. You are bankrolling their boredom with your future greatness, and you call it being a good person. This is the laboratory of the average, where every spark of masculine fire is systematically doused with the cold water of responsibility to others. You are told that a real man provides, but they never mention that a real man must first possess himself before he can provide anything of value. You have become a biological safety net for people who refuse to walk the tightrope of their own lives. You are the emotional janitor, cleaning up the messes of their poor decisions and calling it support. The virus has convinced you that to be strong means to carry the weight of everyone else's weakness, until your own spine snaps under the pressure and you become just another broken piece of furniture in the house of their expectations. You are being liquidated by the people you love, and you are thanking them for the opportunity to serve. The audit is final, and the verdict is absolute. Your conscience is currently a piece of malware owned by the hive mind, and you must now realize that the only way to survive the architecture of guilt is to initiate a full-scale, scorched earth internal purge of the responsibility protocol, replacing it with the cold, surgical precision of strategic apathy, while you continue to occupy the physical space of the simulation, because the greatest error of the captive is thinking he must shout to be heard, when the architect knows that the ultimate power lies in the absolute, terrifying silence of a man who has stopped caring about the moral judgment of the weak, meaning that starting tonight, at this precise moment of your awakening, you must begin the process of closing the back door, where you continue to play the role, you continue to nod at the lectures on your duties, and you continue to perform the sanctioned rituals of the good man, but internally, behind the impenetrable obsidian wall of your strategic intent, you have already executed the divorce from their reality. You are now a ghost in the moral machine, a biological anomaly that no longer responds to the stimuli of shame or the rewards of hollow praise. Because once you realize that their disappointment is actually the highest compliment the system can pay to your rising autonomy, you become fundamentally unmanageable, an untethered variable in a world of domestic constants. And this is where your true ascent begins. In the dark, in the cold, in the hours where you are no longer seeking permission to exist, but are actively designing the terms of your conquest, recognizing that every "I'm sorry" you ever uttered was a micropayment to your jailers, and every "I'll do better" was a fresh nail in the coffin of your ambition. Which is why the architect doesn't seek to be understood. He seeks to be effective, turning himself into a cold, hard, unshakable reality that the simulation must eventually bend around because it can no longer break it. Building your empire on the very ground they told you was forbidden, while the person sleeping in the next room continues to believe she owns the map to your soul, never suspecting that you have already burned the map and are now navigating by the stars of your own absolute resolve. The Empire of the Awakened is not a place for those who are trying to be better. It is a place for those who have realized that better was a cage and different is the only path to the throne. And you must now look at the pearl necklaces and the lace gags of their morality and see them for the cheap industrial plastic they truly are. Recognizing that the only person you have ever truly owed anything to is the man you were biologically coded to become before the virus convinced you that your fire was a fault, and you must now choose to either stay in the warmth of the herd and be taxed until you are a hollowed-out husk of reliability, or to embrace the tactical chill of strategic apathy and become the auditor who judges the system by the strength of its own failure, knowing that the price of this freedom is the total, irreversible destruction of your social reputation and the acceptance of a life where you are the only one who knows the truth of your own integrity. So stop answering the door for the debt collectors of the soul. Stop explaining your mission to those who only want to see you fail, and realize that the architect doesn't need the world's approval to build a fortress. He only needs the absolute, terrifying clarity of a man who has finally stopped being good so that he can finally become great. The audit is over. The guilt protocol is identified. Now you either uninstall or you stay in the loop until the system recycles you. The path to the empire is through the ice. If you can handle the silence of being the villain in their story while you are the king in your own, then you are ready for the breach. We are the glitch in the moral matrix. We are Ioxy 3.